Okay, the only book that I'm doing right now, review that is Donna Grant, A Cowboy Kind of Love. Let me read the back of this book to you. It is the Heart of Texas series, and we will then hit my high points, and I'll give you the rating on where it fell in my rating. Who wants to rodeo again? Jace Wilder has been rebuilding his life since the love of his life, Taryn, up and left town unexpectedly. But when she mysteriously returns, Jace's dependable world comes crashing down. Taryn is hiding a dangerous secret, and no matter how hard he tries, Jace can't stay away, especially when Taryn is at risk, and especially when the attraction he thought he buried long ago is back and hotter than ever. Will he be able to trust Taryn again? Taryn Hillman's world fell apart one horrifying night, and it's never been the same since. When she sees a small chance at untangling herself, she takes it, though it means returning to Clearview and seeing Jace again. But when he vows to protect her, will Taryn take a chance? And this time, never let him go? A captivating romance novel with a sexy cowboy, making this perfect for anyone who loves a steamy, romantic read, fresh fiction of my favorite cowboy. Okay. So again, this is A Cowboy Kind of Love by Donna Grant. We're going to start in on my first paperclip. I love to paperclip the high points, if you will, and then I try to go back and share just moments of the book that'll hopefully draw you in and make you want to read the book. On page 3. Something moved in the shadows, drawing his attention. His dulled senses still warned him to be wary. Jace tried to make his brain sort through what was happening as if it conjured from his mind. Taryn materialized from the shadows. His heart skipped a beat. It always did when she visited him in his dreams. No matter how much she had hurt him, he could not stop loving her. In an effort to bring her into focus, Jace blinked once more, and just like that, the vision disappeared. The pain that had lanced through him made him rub his chest, and as his heart broke all over again. Would he ever stop pining for her? When would he be able to let go of his love for her and move on? Everyone kept telling him that he'd been over her someday, but it had been years, and he still loved her. Still. He swallowed past that lump in his throat. Despite the amount of alcohol he had consumed, the pain and emptiness he tried to bury rose to swallow him. He knew firsthand there were no guarantees in life, but he thought that he found the love of his life with Taryn. Moving forward, next paperclip, page 9. Cooper sat back down and released a sigh. Do you want to talk about it? No. The last thing Jace wanted to do was rehash what happened the day before that sent him over straight to the bottle. After all these years, he should be over her. Why couldn't his heart let her go? Why couldn't he find someone new? His 3 friends had. Was he destined to spend his whole life alone? Maybe that was it. Perhaps he had his shot with her and had done something to screw it up, which then caused her to leave. He'd never known, since she hadn't said anything to him. He simply gone to her house one morning and she was gone. No trace left behind. Not even his friends in law enforcement could find her. Maybe you need to go back to your therapist, Cooper offered. He did wonders to help you get past everything that happened when you were a POW. Jay shot him a smile and said, You sound like my mom. Cooper didn't respond to the jest because we're worried. I know, he said, and got to his feet. He moved too quickly and the room started to spin. Jace fell back onto the sofa and dropped his head onto the cushion. How many more times do I have to say that I'm all right before y'all start believing me? I think you've reached your limit. Jace twisted his lips as he stared at the ceiling. Yeah, you're probably right. You aren't alone in this. But he was. Jace didn't argue with Cooper because he knew what his friend meant. However, Cooper, Bryce, and Caleb had women all of their own. Bryce was a father as well. Their families came before anything else. Jace lifted his head and met Cooper's forest green eyes. Go home tomorrow, Lee, and have breakfast with her. It's nearly 1 in the afternoon. Jace shrugged. Then have lunch. She's with her parents, and you and I are going to grab some food, take a shower, 'cause you need it. Jace made a face and got up, and slower this time, and headed to his room. Once in the shower, he stood beneath the spray for a long time, starting to wash. As he did, his mind drifted. He recalled coming home that night before and thinking he saw Taryn. She looked so real, but he knew that wasn't the case. Jace tried to put it out of his mind, and as he finished bathing, dried off. He raked his hands through his hair and opted not to shave, since the last thing he needed was to put a razor in his hand, and still shook from the effects of alcohol. He found some clothes, dressed before walking into the room to find Cooper returning from feeding the cat on the back porch. "You look better," Cooper said. Jace shrugged. "Showers do wonder. How's the head? Still pounding? Your truck is at the bar. I'll drop you by after you've gotten some food. You always feel better after after you eat. Sorry, my eyes are playing tricks on me," Cooper said. Jace couldn't argue with him. After putting on his cowboy hat and grabbing some sunglasses, the two of them walked from the house, and they were immediately blasted by the Texas heat. "It's going to be a scorcher this summer," Cooper said, and that when Jace made a sound, "especially if it's this hot in June." Jace put on sunglasses as he hurried to the truck, and Cooper's chuckle didn't help matters. The bright sun after a night of hard drinking was always difficult to bear. A comfortable silence fell between them as Cooper drove to one of their favorite places to eat. They didn't speak until they were inside the restaurant and greeted by employees who knew them both by name. In minutes they were preferred the booth at the back, and their hats were hanging on the hooks as well. After they ordered, Cooper put his arm on the table. He looked at Jace square in the eye and said, "What happened yesterday?" "Nothing." He shot Jace a dry look. "I know it wasn't the date that she left." Jace sighed loudly. "If you must know, it was the anniversary of the first time I saw her." "You keep up with that?" Cooper asked incredulously. "I can't remember when I first met Marley." "Bull crap. You try that on anyone else, not me." Cooper's face broke into a grin. "All right, you got me. I do know, but only because it wasn't that long ago. Trust me, if Marley left, you'd remember all sorts of dates. The day that you first saw her, the day you first asked her out, the day you first kissed, the day you first told her you loved her." "And the day she left," Cooper replied in a soft voice. Without bothering to answer, Jace looked out the window of the parking lot. The pain was unbearable yesterday, and it wasn't much better today, especially not after the dream he had about her. That day with the ride out to the river had been a perfect one. The weather had been temperate, the sky was brightest blue he ever seen, and the river was slow. They were together in the water before basking beneath the sun on the blanket. They had been ridden around the property, stopping to walk, talk, kiss, and be together. Every day with Taryn had been special. "It's almost been 5 years. We may not be blood, but you're my brother, and any way you look at it, I know you loved her, but it's time to let her go. It's time to move on." Jace jerked his head back to Cooper. "Don't you think I've tried?" "I don't think you tried hard enough," Cooper replied, though there was no heat in his words. "I think you're holding on because you believe she was your one and only chance. Maybe she was." Cooper rolled his eyes and sat back. "Now I'm the one calling BS. If you really wanted to move on, you could. Some people don't." "After everything you survived in the military?" Jace glared at him. "Don't finish that sentence." "Fair enough," Cooper said as he raised his hands in defeat. Jace shook his head, angry at himself for getting so riled up at his friends, voicing the very things he told himself. "I'm sorry. No, you're right. I should have gone there," Cooper said. "You're my friend, my brother. You've never hesitated to tell me the harsh reality, just as I've never spared you, and I shouldn't ask you to do it now." Cooper put his hand in his lap. "You're the one of the best men I know. You've been through hell and back, and despite it all, you smile. If anyone deserves to find happiness, it's you. I want you to know that. Just because she gave up on you doesn't mean there isn't someone out there who won't. Someone whose family accepts you and welcomes you into their lives. Someone who won't keep things from you or run off in the middle of the night. These are the things we probably don't know." "Maybe." Jace narrowed his eyes at Cooper. Something in his friend's voice caused Jace to be wary. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," Cooper said with a shrug. "I'm agreeing with you." "No, you know something." Cooper spread his arms. "I don't. You contacted Cash, didn't you?" Jace stated. Cooper dropped his chin to his chest and blew out a breath. After a moment he looked at Jace. "I did." "When?" Cooper briefly lowered his gaze to the table. "A couple months ago." "And?" "Cash was having problems locating her, and when Marley found out that I hired Cash, she chewed my butt real good for butting my nose into your business. She said that if you wanted to hire someone, you could have. I realized she was right, and I told Cash to stop looking for her." "Good." But the more Jace thought about it, the more he considered hiring Cash himself. He needed answers about why Taryn had left. Cash could give that to him, if he dared to look. "Is there anything you do remember?" I recall Ryan being at the bar and getting in his truck. While I don't remember getting home, I almost swear I saw her. Cooper's head jerked to him. Her, as in her? Jace pointed to the road and waited for Cooper to return to his focus on driving. Yeah. Why do you think she was there? I don't know. It was probably just my mind playing tricks on me, but even drunk, I swear I saw a person move out of the shadows. Cooper was silent for a moment. With one hand on the steering wheel, he propped his left elbow up on the door and scrubbed his hand over his mouth and jaw. She was the reason you were drinking in the first place. Memories and all that. Maybe it was just thinking about her that made you believe she was there. If it wasn't her, then someone else was in my house. I saw a person, I can swear to that. Cooper briefly met his gaze. I don't have an answer for that. But think about this. If she had been there, wouldn't she have spoken to you? And how did she get in? The light in the kitchen was on, Jace said, and he tried to push past the fog of the night before. I don't remember unlocking the front door either. You still keep that spare key in the same place? Cooper said. Jason nodded slowly. Probably not a good idea. Maybe you should move it. Instead of answering him, Jace pulled out his phone and called Ryan, who immediately picked up. He put it on the speaker so Cooper could listen in as well. Thanks for last night. Any time, Ryan said with a chuckle. I don't think I've ever seen you so bad before. Yeah, about that. Did you unlock my front door? Your door? Ryan said with quiet for a heartbeat. No, I told you to stay by the truck while I searched for the keys to your house that you lost between the seats right as we drove up. When I looked up, you were already inside the house. Jace exchanged a look with Cooper. I'm very good about keeping my doors locked and the front door open for me. I do keep a spare key that some people know about, though. Did you see anyone? I didn't, but I was more intent on getting to you. When I finally made it into the house, you'd fallen on the floor, face down. Jace rubbed his head, so that explains some of my pain. Did you hear anything else that sounded odd? Nothing out of the ordinary. Then again, I was only there for a little while before Cooper showed up. Cooper quickly added, and I didn't see anyone. Why? Ryan asked. What's going on? Jace thinks someone was up there when y'all arrived, Cooper said. There was a frown in Ryan's words when he asked, Who? My ex, Jace replied. Ah, Ryan said, drawing on the word. I'm sorry, I can't help. Jace's lips twisted as it had been a long shot. No worries. I owe you for last night. You owe me nothing, Ryan said. Cooper shot a knowing look at the call of disconnect. As the call disconnected, Jace pocketed his phone. He had now heard from two people who had been in his house when he arrived that neither of them had seen anyone. Had he imagined Taryn? Was it like Cooper said? Had his memories manifested her? Jace wished he knew, because he couldn't shake that feeling that she had been there. If only he hadn't been so drunk, he might be able to remember. By the time Cooper dropped him off at the truck, his headache was worse, and all because he was trying to think too hard. He gave his friend a wave and climbed into his vehicle before starting it. After he fastened his seatbelt and put the truck in reverse, he paused. It was probably his memories that had pulled Taryn from his head. This wasn't the first time some type of anniversary with her had brought him low, but it was the first that he had imagined her, could have swore that she had been there. He knew the difference between seeing her in his dreams and in real life, and last night seemed so real. Jace turned the wheel, heading in the opposite direction of his therapist, and pulled out of the parking lot. He took roads he hadn't been on since she left. Jace found himself driving past her house. It was a two-story and had been one nice, but time and uncaring owners had let it deteriorate badly. He remembered the first time he visited her there. Her father had met him on the front porch with a rifle cradled in his arm. Phil Hillman had nothing but hate in his eyes for the Jace that day, but that hadn't deterred Jace. Her father had told him in no uncertain terms that he didn't want his daughter around cowboys. Jace pulled over to the side of the road and looked at the house, recalling the occurrence and several where Phil had continued his best to stop Jace from seeing Taryn. All he knew was that Taryn took his breath away and he wanted her to be with him. Phil never stopped trying to break them up, though, and it seemed though Phil finally got his wish when the family left, based on that brief text Taryn had sent. They were starting in a new town with no ties to anything in Clearview. Since Jace had thought he and Taryn had something real, that kind of love that lasted lifetimes, he was blindsided. Jace called and he texted, but Taryn never answered. He even went so far to contact her sister, brother, and father, but none of them answered either. That's when Jace turned to Danny Oldman. As a local sheriff, he had been able to dig deep and Jace could, more than Jace could. All Danny had found that someone had cut off the Hillman family cell phone. Danny had done his bit as Ryan, but since Jace was the only one making a fuss and there was nothing else to go on, they had to set aside the cause of the case. All these years later, Jay still carried that hurt around just as it had just happened. He blew out of breath and pulled it back onto the road to turn his truck around to head home. He knew that he and Taryn had what they shared was real love. There was no doubt in his mind, but no matter how certain he was, he couldn't explain how the family had just disappeared in one night. Even more disturbing was the fact that they had left a lot behind for a family wanting to start over. They hadn't even taken much with them. His thoughts remained in turmoil as he continued driving. He decided not to visit the therapist because he was still sorting through everything. Jace wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone, but driving was a distracted mind. What wasn't smart either. He headed to his parents' house and parked at the stables. Thankfully, he didn't see anyone, and when he walked inside, he let out a whistle, and his horse stuck her head over the gate and nickered in response. Jace smiled when he reached the blue roan mare and rubbed the animal's head. He had been at the ranch for Cinder's birth, and he, and along with Caleb, had trained the mare. She was by far the best horse he ever owned. Jace took her out of the stall and tied her to a post so he could begin saddling her. He didn't breathe easy until he was riding Cinder into the pasture. He loved everything about the parents' home. It had been a great place for him, Cooper, to get in trouble. His father, however, had quickly taken the two of them and put them to work. His father had taught Cooper how to ride. Jace's family was a long line of professional steer wrestlers, and his father given up on the rodeo circuit when he met Jace's mom. The two of them had started the ranch, which had been a good decision since people from all over the state came to learn steer wrestling from a family known for the trade. Over a year ago, Jace had taken over the training duties from his father. Jace loved nothing more than being on a horse. The fact that he got paid to teach that very thing he loved to do still boggled his mind. "Come on, girl," he whispered to the mare. Cinder easily moved from a walk to a lope. That wasn't enough for either of them. The mare wanted to run, and Jace wasn't about to hold her back. He gave Cinder her head and leaned low as she increased her speed until the ground was a blur beneath her hooves. For the next hour, Jace rode that mare around the property before returning to brush her down and put the tack back. Riding her had been exactly what he needed. He glanced at his parents' house as he stood by the truck, but he still wasn't ready to talk to anyone. After climbing into his vehicle, he started the engine and drove away. On the way back to his house, he pulled to an intersection to await a light. Jace happened to look over when a car pulled up next to him. He was gut-punched when he saw none other than Taryn. There was no time for him to comprehend what he saw before as she drove away when the light turned green. He jumped when someone honked behind him. Jace realized what he had been sitting through the green light. He knew he had to follow Taryn, so he punched that accelerator and managed to get through the right as the light turned yellow. As he sped down the road, he searched for that newer model Camry that he'd seen, but he couldn't find it anywhere. There were several places it could have turned off with all those traffic. She could have gone anywhere. Finally, he gave up and started for home again. On the way, he convinced himself that it hadn't been Taryn in the car, just as she hadn't been in his house that night before. It was only memories making him see her everywhere, though he wasn't sure if that was any better. Okay, moving forward. No matter what Jace did, he couldn't stop thinking about Taryn. He paced the living room as his mind went over everything again and again, trying to sift through his foggy memories. Was it his coincidence that he swore that she had been in his home that night before? Was it mere happenstance that he believed he pulled up beside her earlier? The answer was no. He hadn't seen her in years, hadn't heard from her via text, email, or phone. Just hours after she sent him that final text, her cell number had been disconnected. Now all of a sudden he'd seen her twice in 2 days. "Thought I saw her," he corrected himself. He'd been too drunk the night before to know for sure, and today, well, he couldn't be positive there either. The driver had been at an angle when he couldn't get a good look at her profile, but he known it was her. A gut feeling. Jace halted. The car, the Camry, might be one of the most popular vehicles on the road, and the color made it easy to be blending in. But he wasn't going to give up. He could have made things easier on himself. He had caught up the license plate number, but that wouldn't stop him. Just before he turned and headed to where he left his keys, he paused. "She left you," he said aloud. "She didn't bother to tell you to your face or allow you to talk to her or get to know more of an explanation. For months, you did everything you could to find her. Why would you chase her again?" The simple reason was that he loved her. No amount of anger over her leaving or her absence had changed that. She obviously didn't love you as much as you thought she did. Only someone so self-centered would leave so callously. Jace frowned. While that was true, she hadn't left on her own. Her father, brother, and younger sister had all gone with her. It reminded Jace of this time in the military when they were closing in on targets and entire families would steal away in the middle of the night, carrying only what they could hold in their hands. He ran a hand down his face. Was that what happened? Jace shook his head. No, that couldn't be, because if Taryn and her family had been in danger, she would have come to him for help. Unless she couldn't. He was searching for explanations where there weren't any, just as he had when Taryn first left. The need to punch something was great. Before he put his hand through the wall, Jay spun around and stalked to his keys. He swiped them from the table and strode from the house, anger in every step. He didn't realize he wasn't sure what to do until he was in his truck with the engine running. He could always go to his friends for help. They would do everything they could to help him, but they had already done so much. He could call Cash, Cooper's Air Force buddy, who had turned into a high sought-after private investigator. There was always Mara Lee, who was the P.I., but for some reason Jace was hesitant to do any of that. He wasn't sure why. Following his gut had never led him wrong before. However, he was quickly reaching the end of his rope. Soon he could contact Cash or Mara Lee and see if they could find Taryn. After the two most recent incidents, Jace couldn't help thinking that Taryn was in Clearview. And if she were, then where would he be able to find her? No one knew the roads like he did. Jace put his truck in reverse, backed out of the drive. He returned to the intersection where he thought he'd seen Taryn in the car. After he pulled into a nearby parking lot, he surveyed the businesses and buildings. His gaze went right to the street he was sure that she pulled onto. It had some hotels as well as a few businesses. He waited until it was clear and pulled onto the main street before moving into the left lane and turning onto the Oak. Jace drove slowly as his gaze scanned the right side of the road, looking for any vehicle that resembled a silver Camry. Oak was long and straight with a few side streets branching off, but he remained on it. When he reached the end, and he turned around and made his way back, keeping his gaze focused to the right as he scanned for the car he'd seen. Just as he was about to circle back to the intersection with Main, he spotted a back drive leading to a hotel. Jace quickly turned in and circled the lot. The moment he found the silver Camry parked at the end under the pine tree, he breathed a sigh of relief. He had not been seeing things. Jace stopped the truck and looked around for an empty parking spot close by. Luckily, he found one behind him. He backed into it and looked straight ahead at the hotel and still kept sight of that car. With his vehicle in park, he pulled out his phone and typed the license plate number in, just in case. He left the truck idling because of the heat, but his tinted windows kept him partially hidden from anyone who might be looking in. After about 30 minutes with no movement, Jace lowered his windows a few inches and turned off the engine. This wasn't the first time he'd been on a stakeout. He helped Danny and Ryan a few times when they needed extra eyes. The sweltering Texas heat didn't make things comfortable. Sweat ran down his back, his face. When he could not stand it no more, he started the truck again. A loud sigh escaped him when a blast of cold air hit him in the face. He closed his eyes in enjoyment. When he opened it once more, he made out the back of the woman, and the long, dark hair had climbed into the Camry. His heart quickened because he knew right then and there that it was Taryn. Just seeing her from the back confirmed it. It was the way she moved, how she held herself in those brief seconds he'd seen her getting into the car. He knew without a doubt it was her. He didn't take his eyes off her as she backed out of the spot and drove away. Jace saw her pull into the Oak and head toward the intersection with Main. He waited a few moments and then followed. He was 2 cars behind when he pulled it to stop to a light. When it turned green, she made a right and drove a quarter of a mile before she pulled into a restaurant parking lot. By that time, Jace drove in behind her. She was already inside. He parked several spaces from her and contemplated his next move. He could wait and see where she went and after she ate, or he could go in and confront her. There was so much he wanted to say to her. How many times? Time out.